Right, this one is the very first thing we did in the class, which was a pot protector. You know, those, they're shaped like this, and you get them in between pots, and they often come, you can buy them in the shops. If you buy a set of pots, they often have them as cardboard cutouts between the pots to stop them scraping each other. So we're going to make a pretty one. So the first thing I've done is, using one of the cardboard ones that came with pots, I cut out, I use that as a template, and I have cut out from some simple batting. This is stuff you can have on the inside of coats. It's got a thin kind of, I think, nylon lining piece of fabric quilted onto it, which is very handy for this kind of thing because it's it'll go into the machine very easily. So, and I have done a very simple patchwork, just little boxes for the top bit, and put that to one side for the now. And we're just going to do a simple single sheet backing. So this is a bit of scrap fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to put this onto the fabric, leave a bit of a seam allowance. So you can see the seam, move this into the, there we go, seam allowance, just tuck it in so that you have some seam allowance around the edge. And what we're going to do is we're going to baste this with big stitches, and I'm going to use a thread that'll blend with the fabric, because we're not going to, unlike normal basting stitches, we're not going to take these basting stitches out. We're going to baste it because we're going to be doing a lot of, we're going to be hauling this inside out afterwards, and we want to be able to be sure that the batting stays in position. So we're just going to pop a few pins in here, and then we're going to whiz around as close to the edge as we can. We're not going to, we don't want to sew you know, far in from the edge. We want to be as close to the edge of this as we can. Okay, so a few pins just to hold us in position, and these make very pretty, you know, if somebody's moving into a house or anything, or just for yourself, they're very nice to have in the drawer, rather than, you know, plain ones. So anywhere at all, I'm just going to start, and I'm going to, got my needle on the right hand side, and I've got it right close to the edge. So we're just going to go off, and I've got my stitch length as big as I can get it. And right to the corner, and around we go. And go around. Move your fabric as much as you need to as you're going. And swivel and pivot, pivot. Yep. I'm not worried if I don't hit the mark on all these. I just want this to hold this in place, and I want it close to the edge. This is not going to be seen. We're not worried about it. And any stitching on the other side will either blend with the fabric or won't. But the main thing about that is that it's going to be underneath anyway. When you look in, you're not going to be seeing it. It's going to be hidden. So no, it's number 3, and I cut 8 into this. Now what this does, this whole thing, as first class it might be a bit adventurous, but what it does is it really makes you have to get comfortable with your machine. And you have to get comfortable going around corners and curves and sew in straight lines. And yeah, 1, 2, 3, on to number 4 now, which is good. sewing, straight lines and curves and are all very important to be able to do. So if you can't do it by the time we're finished this, oh, well, a few more of these anyway. And like I say, I use the cardboard cutouts that come with the pots as a template, but I couldn't find mine because I've just recently tidied my sewing space, so I can't find anything. So I cut a folded up piece of fabric into an 8 eighths, and then I cut that little wedge into it was a curve in it, and then I cut chunks out of it. Basically, I cut it myself. You know, it's not that difficult to make a rough circle out of a square and then cut triangles out of that. So run in with skirt and do it better. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. We're very nearly round, you will be pleased to hear. Last one. Now, lift your presser foot when you're turning your circle. And we finish. Okay, right. We have gone all the way around. And we now have this. So now we're going to just cut off the excess fabric, leaving a seam allowance. I can't stress this enough. Do not cut very close to your stitch line. And there's a purpose to a seam allowance. It's not to waste fabric. It is to give you somewhere to stitch. And it's to, if you cut really, really close to your stitch line and it's raw edge like that, then you run the risk of the fabric fraying through your stitch line, then you've got a hole. So let's not go there. Now, here we have our lovely patchwork top. So I'm going to put this down, face up, and I'm going to put this face down. And I'm just going to put it roughly in the middle. Oh, yeah, roughly in the middle. Roughly in the middle. Okay. And then I am going to pin. Just replace all the pins going through the two fabrics. If you want to tuck it into the corner, go for that. If you think, oh, I'll use some of this patchwork for something else, but I'm going to center it as best I can. Now, so when you're pinning, try not to pin folds into it. Just take the pin out. I'm folding the fabrics together, replace the pin, and you'll be pinning through the two fabrics. There we go, we got them all done. Now, you need to pick a place to leave an opening. So we're going to sew all the way around again, but this time we're going to sew, I'll do it over here. We're going to sew on the outside edge. So just on the outside of the batting. We're just going to follow that line all the way around outside of the batting. But we must pick somewhere to leave a hole. Now, I suggest leaving a hole in the top of one of them, and make sure you do sew the corners because they're real pain to put in otherwise. And the other thing I would say is, if you're leaving a hole, leave it somewhere that's fully in a square, so you're not leaving a hole where there's over a seam. For example, like here, if you fold it back, you can see there's a seam here. If I leave the hole here and I'm trying to turn it inside out, I'm pulling on that seam. So I'm going to leave the hole here. So if you want, you can put a pin here and say I'm going to sew from here, and I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to go all the way around and come back to here and stop. And when you start and stop, do a back stitch, or locking stitch as it's called, and that'll help as well preserve your seam before you start hauling it inside out. So like I say, needle down. I'm going to do a thread out of the way. Oh, come now. Okay, thread isn't going to get out of the way. Right, I'm going to do a little back stitch, and then off we go. Make my stitch a little shorter. And don't do what I just did. Leave your needle down when you turn. You go around those corners. You can swivel and pivot, and you can needle down, turn. Sometimes you'll be able to turn very smoothly on the machine. Sometimes you'll need to pick up the foot and actually move the fabric. So depending on the tightness of the curve, some you can just move it around under it, and sometimes you have to lift the foot and go. And take this out. So do make sure that your foot is down when you want to lift your foot, otherwise your fabric will move. And we're going to stay as close to the black as we can. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not selling these in the shop. Maybe we are. If we are, do try to be perfect. And still, all of this is inside and isn't going to be seen necessarily, except in how nice your points are. And we're about halfway around now. See, this is not a long project. I think one of the longest bits about it is, you know, making your little patchwork top. And even then, you don't have to do patchwork top. I just like patchwork tops. I like using up kind of scrappy fabrics and having something cheery and interesting to look at when I open my kitchen drawers. Stabbing myself. Speaking of stabbing myself, we'll take these out now as well. Nearly round. Now this batting isn't, I got this online, I can't remember the shop, but it's usually for the inside of anoraks or coats. And you can get different colored material on it too. This I got black, you can get white, you can get other colors, but it is very handy for going under machine. There's no fluffy bit to snag in your needle. Now look, we're already round at the start again. And you can use anything, any kind of soft fabric. If you want to sew in, you have an old blanket lying around that you don't use anymore in the bed. Now I'm going to take this out, and this, and this, and once again, don't forget we are stopping a little way in, okay? No. Okay, locked. Now, just because I fluffed this corner here, I'm going to go around this corner again. You would not be doing this because you would have kept your needle down when you went around the corner. I didn't, and I left a hole. No, there we go. Okay, now this is what we have. So what we're now going to do is we are now going to carefully cut, and we are going to cut about 1/4 of an inch around outside of our seam allowance. We're not going to cut really close to our seam. Sorry, cut 1/4 inch from our seam, not our seam allowance. We are going to leave the seam allowance there because, right, I managed to run out of storage space while I was filming that earlier bit. So since we last saw you, I've cut all the way around. I've cut V's into all of these, and I have cut the corners here. Now, when you are cutting the corners, be very, very, very careful that you cut to the outside seam line, not the inside one. So you don't cut to your basting line, you cut to the line where you have sewn these. So one way of doing it is to look at the back and cut to that line, because that's where you see the line you're not supposed to cut past. So the next thing we're going to do is these inner curves are we need to open them out. So we're going to cut, and again we're going to cut to this line here on the back that you can see, otherwise disaster beckons. So we're going to cut close to those lines but not through them. So as close as we dare to the stitch line. I'm doing a couple of cuts for each one into the stitches, just so that there's a bit of room to maneuver, because at the moment there's no room, but once we do a couple of cuts in, woo, there we go, loads of room to maneuver. This one's extremely tight, so again we're going to cut in as close as we dare to that line. Don't think that needs another cut there. This one will need a couple. It's quite wide. The narrower ones you can get away with just maybe one deep in, as you can see, right into the stitch line, but not through it. So we've been around. Now, all my little bits. Now we find the bit that we didn't sew across the top, where we have left our gap. We sew there, we sew there, we sew there. It would be easier to look on this side, wouldn't it? There we go. Aha! Now, this is why we need to do the back stitch, because we are going to be pulling this entire thing through. So I tend to reach in and push through as opposed to pull. And then this one, and then we push the whole thing through. Gently, gently, but with some, oh my goodness. Again, pushing from behind as much as we can. It will go through. Trust me on this. It will. It just need to have faith. The materials clusters up really small, and there's a lot of air in that wadding. And look, it is through. So, okay, it's through. Now we're going to push each of the little arms out. And this is where we find out definitively whether we have poked holes in our own sewing. And this is why it's important to base the lining, the batting down before you start doing this. Because could you imagine trying to keep your batting in place when you're holding it around like this? It just, you know, or trying to insert it afterwards. So now I'm going to just push out my fingers first of all, and I might go in with my trusty paintbrush. And there's all the corners. A little paintbrush or a crochet hook, something that's got a bit of a point but not too much of a point. Like a pencil might be too sharp and might go through the corner, but you know, something with a roundy tip that'll get into all the nooks and crannies and give it a nice point is very handy to have hanging around. So now, so far so good. Our inner seams are lying pretty flat because they've been cut. Our points are looking pretty good. I'll just dig out this one as well. Now, I'm just going to roll this along the seam, and you can see that we've got some really nice points here, which you get when you chop out, you take away the bulk. So there, you know, this stuff isn't rocket science. You just need to attend to the details as you're going. And now the last thing we're going to do is this will bend down, and we're going to put a stitch. You can hand stitch it or machine stitch it. I'm just going to machine stitch it because it's quick and it's easy, and like I say, this is going in the drawer, so we're not going to be too worried about it. And there we go. We have got tangled threads on the back. We have a pop protector. Voila!